The Dallas Cowboys added George Pickens this week. How are they going to find enough targets for all of these receivers? We'll break it down next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head over to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're going to take a look at the Cowboys' passing offense. We're going to go position by position, kind of talking about the depth chart, how we expect the targets to be distributed. Let's first start at wide receiver, where Cowboys made a big addition this week. I don't know if you heard, Landon.
Apparently, I heard something about it. Yeah.
Big deal on Twitter. Let's start with CeeDee Lamb. I think CeeDee Lamb's role is pretty locked in here. We got to assume he's going to get 160-ish targets at least.
I don't know. That's what I'm wondering. And I think that this is why we need to have this conversation, is that I certainly think he is going to get a lion's share of targets. I certainly think he's going to get, probably somewhere in the top 5 of the NFL as far as targeting goes, right? I do wonder if they aren't looking to try to kind of reduce that target number, right? Because I do think that is an absurdly high number of targets that he received. I think that was his 2023 number, right? I think it actually went down this year.
2022 was 156. 2023 was 181.
That's right.
And then last year was 152 in 15 games. So he's averaging roughly 10 targets per game over the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, and I do wonder if they don't want to try to reduce that load a little bit. I mean, obviously we want to get CeeDee Lamb the ball as much as possible. He's clearly shown that he can handle the volume, which is fantastic, and that's, I think, what makes him so incredible. But I don't know that you necessarily want to do that. I think you want to get, a healthy run game involved. I think part of the benefit of having a George Pickens in the room is that you don't have to feed a CD quite as much. And I also think that, there's some other aspects here that are going to feed into just wanting to distribute the ball a little bit more. But I do wonder, I think that there is obviously huge benefits to feeding CD and giving him as many targets as he can handle. But I do wonder if the Cowboys, look at the situation with Pickens and the run game as an opportunity to just try to reduce his load a little bit so that they can make sure that he's healthy and efficient through the long haul.
So my thoughts is I think the 150 is kind of the magic number. That's about 8.5 to 9 targets a game. Okay. And again, a lot of times the Cowboys have been using CD on bubble screens, easy targets. So those are completely different than throwing the ball across the middle of the field, 15 yards. That's different. But I do agree. 181 is too many, but I think 140 isn't enough because he's such a good playmaker. So that's where I think 8 to 9 targets per game is probably the right number. We saw a couple of games, I think in 2023, where he was at 16, 17, 18 targets. That's too many.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to go in with the idea that you're probably going to need to feed him that much. But if you see Pickens or Ferguson having a better season, or Schooney takes a step or something, I certainly think that they should try to work towards lowering that target count, just to hopefully get better individual returns on each one of those, on some efficiency, especially as the season goes on. You just don't want his body completely wearing down. So I certainly think, yes, until there's more talent that you're trying to feature, 140 targets is something that he'll make without blinking an eye. But if you do start to see that you've got something in Pickens, or you do see that Ferguson is bouncing back, I wouldn't be shocked, and I wouldn't be opposed to them really pulling down. I think I did a whole deep dive on targeting last night, and CeeDee Lamb had a really great season in 2021 off 120 targets, right?
Sure.
And if you could figure out a way to feel comfortable with giving Cooper I'm not Cooper. So I'm looking at the 2021. If you're okay with giving Pickens and Ferguson 100 targets each, because they're performing at a high level. I think that is a great way to try to reduce the exposure you have on CeeDee Lamb week to week basis.
Yes. Now let's talk about Pickens, because he's not a high volume receiver. He's actually at his best when he's getting like 4 to 5 to 6 targets a game because of the way he's used, right?
Yeah.
Think like Michael Gallup. He's this high
exactly
receiver where you're throwing him the ball down the field and letting him make plays. So I don't see a scenario in which he gets like 120 targets unless
no.
he gets hurt. And real quickly, I do think it's important that the Cowboys establish a hierarchy because, and I'm going to say this, if Pickens thinks that he is the wide receiver 1B to CeeDee Lamb's 1A, I think some problems could come up. But if he knows he is the clear-cut number 2 in this offense, I think things can go very, very well.
Can we take this opportunity a little bit to pivot and talk about his press conference that he spoke in yesterday? I do think that the answers that he gave yesterday were exactly the kind of thing you want to hear, right? Like he did, and I love some of the phrasing that he used, like keeping his feet where they are, or making sure his feet are where they are. That's mature talk, right? Like, and I don't know if he's parroting somebody else's talking point that he just heard right off screen right before the press conference, but it was good to hear him acknowledge that there were issues in the past and that he didn't feel like they were personality based and that he was wanting to come in here and work. It doesn't always mean anything, but we have also seen guys that couldn't even get to the press conference without causing a stir and having problems. So it was good to see him kind of answer questions, and I thought in a really fine manner, and it sounded very mature and like he's on a good path. So we'll see how that turns out.
All right, let's keep going to the rest of the receivers. Now, I think this is where it gets really interesting I think Jalen Tolbert's going to be the clear-cut wide receiver 3. It's just what does a wide receiver 3 in Brian Schottenheimer's offense that we expect to maybe be a little bit more balanced, maybe use more 2 tight end sets. How many targets does a wide receiver 3 get in this offense? I don't know. I got to assume it's going to be far less than what we saw during like the Mike McCarthy 2021, 2022 stages.
Well, I think you were seeing, multiple guys getting 60 to 70 plus targets. And I don't think that that's going to be the case here, right? They'll probably condense the receiving core down to a little bit, tighter group as far as, more than 30 plus targeting in there. And I also think that we'll talk about it too. Obviously, tight end is going to be a huge part of this. And I think running back will even eat into a little bit of the targeting because I feel like you've got a guy that you want to feature in that way. So I imagine that it's going to be a tighter group. They'll figure out the hierarchy, and then likely, Tolbert will get a healthy amount, and then Turpin and Brooks and Mingo may split kind of a 60 target share that used to go to, let's say, Cedric Wilson back in the day. They'll all get something like that.
I start looking at the depth chart at CeeDee, Pickens, Tolbert, top 3. You know that Turpin's going to be probably your wide receiver 4 at worst, and he's guaranteed a spot on the roster.
And guaranteed touches too, right?
Yeah,
like
and guaranteed because he's so different. So now we're down to wide receiver 5, and it's like that scene in The Dark Knight where we're gonna have tryouts, right? It's Jonathan, it's Jonathan Mingo, it's Ryan Flournoy, it's Jalen Brooks, it's whoever else you want. Because I don't know if this team is going to have 6 receivers on it like they've had over the last couple of years.
They're not going to feature. They're not going to heavily target 6 receivers. That's for sure.
No, I mean,
and I think
I think that 6.
Well, I don't know, and I think that's where the difference. That's where the run first mentality is really going to show itself. Is that it may not affect the top end guys targeting, but I just don't think they're going to throw the ball enough to like give a 4th receiver 60 targets this year. Versus that.
And that's where I wonder. Again, I hate to even say it, but is there a chance that like Jonathan Mingo is a healthy scratch in some of these games because
certainly
he's just not one of your top 4 receivers?
Absolutely. That is certainly a possibility. But I will say, for all the reasons that we're worried about a George Pickens, I guess it's nice to have some kind of backup X option. So at least you've got one of those 2 guys. So there you go.
Yeah, and this is what we've been saying, why they needed to make a trade for not just any receiver or draft any receiver, but to get somebody at the top of the depth chart, because now you feel really good about Tolbert as your wide receiver 3. You feel fine about Turpin as your wide receiver 4. And hey, if Flournoy beats out Jonathan Mingo in training camp and he's just the better option, so be it. That's just the way that is. We just feel so much better about the entire offensive side of the ball after getting a trade done.
Yeah, you're hoping to see breakout as opposed to having to have a breakout in order
Counting
to
on it. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the tight ends because they're going to be a big part of this Brian Schottenheimer offense. Let's talk about what we can expect from not only Jake Ferguson, but also Luke Schoonmaker next. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Did you know that your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you are ready to go. Dive into hundreds of premium titles, including EA Sports, College Football 25 to Call of Duty, as easily as you stream your favorite TV shows. Listen, there's been a lot of times where I'm traveling, I'm on the road, and I would love to play a couple matches of Call of Duty, but I don't want the hassle of packing up my Xbox. Now I don't need to worry about it. I just grab my Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K and I'm ready to go. Head over to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, and Fire TV Cube. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're discussing the Dallas Cowboys passing offense. And let's get to the tight end position because I got to assume, Landon, that the tight ends are going to be a feature part of this offense. And the Cowboys' success on that side of the ball probably comes down to how well these tight ends play.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I do think that part of the reason that I wanted to have this episode and talk about targeting a little bit is because I do feel like with our focus of wide receiver too, we have ignored the really big need for a bounce back at the tight end one position, right? And in this offense with Dak Prescott, that position is every bit as important as wide receiver two. And I think, going back and doing some of this targeting study really shined a light on that, right? We actually haven't had Ferguson have a Dalton Schultz level year.
No. We've been thinking it's going to come in, and it just hasn't yet.
It just hasn't. And Dalton Schultz in 2021 had 800 yards receiving, was very efficient, and was, and we all thought that Ferguson would be able to replace that and come in here and certainly. I think early on that was a clear trajectory. It felt like we were headed there, right? He was a different kind of player a little bit, but certainly, you felt like you were on your way. It really fell off a cliff last year. I mean, obviously the injury was a part of that, but even when he was on the field, I felt like there was a drop in a level of play. His catch percentage wasn't as high. He wasn't, moving the ball as much once he did get the ball. And I certainly am expecting a bounce back year from Ferguson, but I think it's worth mentioning that this is something that we should be concerned about, that we should be looking into, because it's every bit as important as that wide receiver two position that we've been all harping on all season. We have a solution in house, but we don't know for sure, that Ferguson is ready to have that kind of bounce back year. And I think there's also the opportunity for him to face some stiff competition at this point from the guys beneath him.
And I think we all thought that the Cowboys were going to be able to easily replace Dalton Schultz because he's a good but not great tight end, right? And I think there was a lot of people that just assumed that Schultz was a product of Dak Prescott, and I think he was to a little bit, but he's also just a good player, right? And we saw how much that Dak likes to lean on that tight end, and so having a Ferguson last year who was clearly not 100%, that took a step back. I think the added weight took away some of his explosiveness. And it wasn't like Ferguson was a super explosive athlete coming out of Wisconsin. I did think that had a big impact on the offense, but much like George Pickens, and this is why I don't hate this, you have Jake Ferguson going into a contract year. Like everything is on the table for Ferguson to have a big season. And if he performs well, he could get $13-14 million a year in free agency. He's got to have a big season for this offense to work.
Yeah, and I think that the Pickens trade, he's a sneaky winner in this Pickens trade, because I think, part of the issue that he was starting to experience, I mean, I completely agree that I think the added weight did not help him. But I also think that part of the issue is that he started seeing more double teams, because teams knew that, hey, obviously we can double CeeDee, we can double Ferguson. who else is there left to do anything against us, right?
Yeah.
And we'll let Tolbert and the rest of your collection of wide receivers try to beat us, and they struggled, and Ferguson struggled to beat double teams because I just don't think he's that type of tight end, right?
No, no,
He's
no.
not going to beat double teams, so which is that's not a realistic expectation. So having Pickens out there. Obviously makes doubling both doubling Ferguson and Lamb very difficult.
You can't do it. Yeah.
You can't do it both. So all three. So it gives him more opportunities for more one-on-one situations, which I think he'll shine in. And I think it also provides schematically more space in the middle of the field where, let's be clear, the place where Dak wants to feature Ferguson is up the seam. That's where he wants to throw those balls. So the opportunity to kind of clear out some space in the middle because Pickens is on the outside, I think will provide more opportunity for a guy like Ferguson. And I also think we do need to have a conversation about Schoonmaker as well, because I think that he's a guy that's coming into this situation having a better season last year than Ferguson did last year. And I understand that Ferguson was injured, obviously, but part of the issue that Schoonmaker's face is opportunity. And I think that he has to earn those opportunities, and that there's been some issue with that. But I do think that when he's been on the field and they featured him, especially last season, you saw some good stuff, some good performance stuff. He had a higher success rate, or at least an on par success rate than he had a higher success rate than Ferguson last year. And so, just more yards per catch and just better numbers overall. So I'm not suggesting that Ferguson is about to lose his job, but what I am suggesting is that we should not suppress targeting to Schoonmaker because of Ferguson any longer. I think Schoonmaker has earned his opportunities to get on the field and, potentially even take some of those maybe starting snaps with Ferguson, maybe in a rotation situation.
I just don't know what happened with Schoonmaker last year, because he started the year playing a lot of snaps, like 19 against Cleveland. Then he became the starter when Ferguson went down 28-25. And then it tanked 19 snaps, 21 snaps. And then there was this 3-game stretch against the 49ers, 2 snaps, against the Falcons, 1 snap, against the Eagles, 11 snap. Brevin Spanford was playing over him at one point in the season. And then all of a sudden, the next couple of weeks, 45, 43, 50 snaps. So I don't know if it was like a practice thing. They weren't thrilled with how he was performing there. If it was he wasn't doing well in the meetings, I don't know. But one of the things I do know is this is the first offseason in I think 3 years that Schoonmaker is not dealing with like a major injury. He's not coming back. Coming back from a surgery. If it's ever going to happen for Schoonmaker, it's got to happen this year. Like, we are already going into I think he's going to be 27 this year. Mm-hmm. It's got to happen this year.
Yeah, he's actually older than Ferguson. So yeah, he is turning 27 this year. And it's hard not to talk about Scooney and not think of Mozzie, right? Obviously they're draft mates of 1 and 2. And also they've both had this same issue, both Michigan guys, both had the same issue where, they had really kind of problematic first 2 seasons because of injury, because of whatever difference they had. That they this is their first year to have a true off season without having to worry about recovering from a surgery or something like that. So I am high on seeing exactly what kind of opportunities that they're going to give him, and to see how he kind of avails of them. I will add that you pointed out that he had some time in the middle of the period the season where it felt like he was not getting targeted as much. It does sound like we got some rumblings at certain points that there's a confidence issue with him, right? And that I think that he wasn't practicing well because of a lack of confidence. And so I think as he's gotten more exposure, more targeting, I think that's helped him. And I think he's gotten more confidence. And so I'm hoping that they don't kind of, back and forth him with this. They just lean into it a little bit more and try to work through that.
I'm just open to any and all possibilities here. Like, it wouldn't shock me if we get midway through the season and Schoonmaker's the number 1 tight end on his team, because he's just more physically gifted than what Jake Ferguson is. And maybe it clicks.
Absolutely.
I also won't be surprised if Brevin Spanford is just playing over him because he's the better blocker, and Ferguson is the guy that's the tight end 1. And we're wondering every single week, okay, how is Schoonmaker even going to play 5 snaps this week? I'm just open to any possibility here.
Yeah, I think the good news is that the Cowboys have some talent here. They just need to figure out how they're going to use it, and they certainly need Ferguson to get back to where he was in the previous seasons.
All right, let's talk about the running backs because I wouldn't be surprised, Landon, if we see the Cowboys use the running backs out of the backfield more as receivers than what we saw last year. Let's talk about Jaydon Blue's receiving ability next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Here's how it works. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves and the news never stops. Just look at the Cowboys. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Landon, let's talk about the run game or the running backs, because I do think the running backs are going to be used more as receivers. How do you expect them to use Jaydon Blue?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, right? Because the Cowboys typically, operate somewhere in the range of 55 to 70 targets per season for their running back one, right? Or at least the running back that they are targeting in the pass game the most, right? And then, depending on who that secondary back is, they may get anywhere from 20 to 35, So I would imagine that Blue is probably going to get kind of closer to the high end of that number, right? I just think that it's a way that they're going to want to feature him out of the backfield. He had like something like 50 catches in college last year with like 6 touchdowns. So he was featured quite a bit as a receiver, in college as well. And I just think that, you think about how this Cowboys offense has worked at different times. I mean, you've got guys spreading out the field, and then often, especially with this, kind of Tampa 2, this Fangio kind of revolution, this where they're putting caps on the speed at the top, they're putting 2 safeties. There's just been a lot more of the dump off pass where the running back comes out and just runs a little hook route and is wide open with a bunch of space. And the idea is that that's how they want to throw. That they want you to throw the ball to, so they can rally to make the tackle. But if you have a more elusive back there, I do think that you're going to be able to get upwards of 3 or 4 more yards potentially per one of those little dump off receptions. And over time that really accumulates, especially, if you're talking about a second down when the difference is getting 3rd and 3 versus 3rd and 6, you know what I'm saying? So I think that's one area where you're going to see some improvement. Is I just think, especially versus Rico Dowdle last year.
Yeah.
Ezekiel
I love
Elliott.
Rico, but Rico was not a receiver, and Zeke's receiving ability was always very overrated.
Yeah, and at the very least, you've got more juice on the guy that's receiving those. So he the chance of him breaking a tackle and taking it to the house is just a lot better, right? So, yes. And you want to get a guy like Jaydon Blue out in space. That's a huge aspect of his skill set. So I do imagine that the running backs are going to get their share of receiving targets. The question becomes, who else in this backfield is worth significant targeting at any point? Because I don't know that we've got anybody else that we feel great about. I mean, the other player in the backfield is likely to be someone in that Javonte Williams, Phil Maffa role, and you're not necessarily going to throw a ton of passes to those guys, but maybe like a slip screen or two, here or there when they're not expecting it, and just to get a big body out in space. But I think it's likely that we'll see similar kind of targeting that we've seen Tony Pollard and Zeke get in the early 2020s. but maybe less targeting for whoever the second running back is on this team.
It's weird. I envision Jaydon Blue being used a lot as a early down receiver, because I think when you get to like third downs, I think that's where Javonte Williams is going to be on the field, because he's just a better pass blocker. But I remember, like, oh gosh, Lance Dunbar in like 2015, where the Cowboys would have him in the backfield on first and second down. And that's when your linebackers would just drop way out in these cover twos. And it just left a nice soft spot for Lance Dunbar. And you throw him the ball on just a little drop off route, and it's 7 yards. And all of a sudden it's 2nd and 3. But you didn't want Lance to be on the field in like 3rd and 8s, because that's a lot of times when teams are sending linebackers to blitz, and he was just too small to pick him up. So I almost envision that's the way they're going to use Lance.
Yes.
Sorry to Lance. You use Blue, but you're right. Who's the other running back? My hope is that it's Hunter Lipke, a fan favorite of mine, because I do think he's the guy that can come in on 3rd down and pass block, but also be the guy that can leak out and be the underneath receiver. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Javonte, but I'm kind of hoping it's Lipke.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you obviously stole my guy, and that's rude. But I hope it's Lipke too. But I just don't imagine that they're going to give him significant targets. Right? It's likely going to go to Schooney and Fergie.
He's been good anytime he's got targets in the passing game.
You don't need to tell me, buddy. I've been screaming about it since the beginning, so I agree. But I just don't know if that's likely to happen on a significant level.
Yeah, I will say a bit, and maybe that's somebody else they bring in. I don't think Javonte and Miles Sanders are that big of threats as receivers. Neither Phil Maffa, so we'll see. All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter @McCoolBCB. I'm @Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here on Monday.